Good morning. This is Sunrise. I'm Ayo Makini and I say welcome to the show. Hope you had a good week. Everything, that is happening in the country will definitely, is actually something significant enough to give one concern, but there isn't any reason for you to be concerned because there's always, something to be thankful and to be grateful to God for. And most certainly that is the kind of thing that we're looking forward to this morning. Well, all of the issues that are bedeviling the whole nation are right there. But, one stood out for me in the course of within the past 1 or 2 weeks when the governor of Ekiti State and chairman of the Governors Forum said unemployment is one of the things fueling insecurity in the country. That resonated a lot with me because, as I have said a few times, if you do a simple Google search of causes of insecurity in Nigeria, just check it up on your phone. One of the top 5 that you will find, in some cases, the number 1 is unemployment. And of course, you will still find poverty as an issue. So the question that came to my mind then is, what are we going to do about it? I want to believe also that that fact is not lost on the entire country because, as we all very well know, Governor Fayemi is also a member of the National Economic Council. Consequently, I expect that that would also have been mentioned. Now, if you look at some of the programs that government has, they're big on employment and the rest of them. The key question I'm asking is, so what is wrong with implementing these programs in a way that we don't have to go the way we are going? And then that's on the one hand. On the other hand is creating the employment. What do we need to do about that? The question that comes to my mind about that is, okay, so we know that government, whether federal, state, or local, cannot create enough employment for more than 100 million people in the country that the president said 2 years ago that we need to pull out of poverty. So we need to galvanize the private sector. So what are the things that we need to do? Ensure that micro, small, and medium enterprises, which globally and even in Nigeria amount for between 60 to 80% of jobs in the country. But then if you look at the things that those businesses are going through, the kind of things that your own business is going through, for instance, as a micro business, as a small business, as a medium enterprise, and all of that, And then, what are we doing about the taxes that, in the way that they have to pay, taxes, levies, and all. I counted once and I found between about 20 or more taxes and levies that all kinds of businesses and all kinds of individuals have to pay to government. So many things like that. But that's not to say that while that is on the one hand, we are also talking about hunger. The challenges are there. So on the one hand, we are fighting insecurity because of unemployment. On the other hand, it is difficult to get back to the farms, which is about one of the biggest employers of labor in the country because of insecurity. It's a kind of vicious cycle, isn't it? So how do we wriggle out of this? I don't know. But I guess every one of us needs to play our part one way or another. What does government have to do? Oh, government has a lot on its own hands. But what do we have to do? And that's another job of work altogether. Well, in the course of the program today, a number of things are going to play. I am particularly excited about 2 of them, but one of them really, touches me. So, as we all very well know, we are dealing with insecurity on a large scale. And a good number of people have said that there's a lot more to what's going on than meets the eye. And we have heard said over and over again that, from the presidency to governors, we've heard them say that there are politicians behind all of this insecurity. Are they faceless? Can't we just round them up? What's the job of the DSS? The intelligence community in the country? If we know them, what's holding us? So maybe this is part of the things I will be thinking about or rethinking in our first topic this morning, Rethinking Security Strategies. We have about 2 or 3 gentlemen who will be joining us for that one. Now, from today, for the rest of the week, it's World Vaccination Week, World Immunization Week, if you like, whichever one, you prefer. So that one is also there, and the focus, the goal this year is vaccination brings us closer. How? We'll find out in the course of time. And tomorrow, April 25, is World Malaria Day. So we want to keep an eye on Malaria Day and Nigeria's effort over the years to bring down the severity of malaria in the country. For how long have we been having malaria elimination programs, and what do you, Nigerian, have to do to make it all go away? We'll keep our eye on that one. And then, of course, there is Earth Day. So we will also focus on Earth Day 2021. So who will be our artist of the week? Is he she? All right, you'll find out. Well, as you can see, you'll find out, of course, in the course of time today, but you can be sure it's someone that you'll want to listen to. As you can see, I'm home alone. That's what happens when you send your wife to the market, or in the kitchen, or in that other place. In the meantime, grab your cup of cocoa or cocoa, and I'll be right back. In the course of the week, we had a conversation about one insecurity issue or another, and a caller, well, a contributor on Twitter said he looked forward to a day where the newspapers, the front pages of the newspapers, will not have one issue of insecurity for a whole week. Well, that's perhaps, means that we have a lot of work to do. So the conversation on how to rejig our security continues, especially at this time when insecurity issues continue to aggravate, seem almost endless. Let's have this conversation again and see if there is anything, any area we have left untouched. Mike Ejiofor is a former DSS official. He joins us from our studio in Abuja. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Ejiofor, as well as Oluseun Bogunja, who is a security engineer. Gentlemen, most grateful for your presence on our program today. Well, Mr. Ejiofor, let me ask you, you have been quite vocal about this issue. You have talked in the media space a lot about it. Is there anything, given that after all counsel, all analysis, all talk about all of the issues about insecurity that we are having, is there anything, is it possible that we are leaving out any conversation, anything untouched?
Life itself is dynamic, so there's no way we can exhaust all the measures, but we'll continue to talk. But the fact remains that the managers of our security, do they even watch TV, or they listen to what other analysts, not myself particularly, have been saying? Because it's very critical at this point in time. I had Governor Fayemi yesterday talking about, the call by Nigerians to change the leadership of the military, which has been effected. And we're still seeing the attacks ongoing. And it calls to question the issue of our structure. I'll continue to emphasize on this, that our structure, architectural structure is faulty, because you don't expect people operating in a different environment, not used to achieve much success. So I think that's a major problem. We need to, I'll continue to emphasize, we need to localize our security to solve the problems locally. I think that's very, very key.
But in the process of getting that done, we've also heard from the last administration of the police, from the leadership of the former IG, initiated that community policing strategy. Are you saying that that wasn't even going to break the ice at all?
Well, community policing, of course, would have broken the ice if the structures are properly placed. But by that, I mean, you see, these are people, community policing involves members of the community, members of the public, to volunteer information and assist the police in their onerous task of maintaining peace and security. These people are not paid. And you know, in Nigeria, things are difficult. They are volunteers. And when they volunteer to a certain extent, they want to look for what they will eat. Because there's hunger in the land. We must admit that. So, but what I think, in addition to community policing, the new Inspector General of Police has an onerous task to a very big one at that, you know, because I think he should start by building public confidence in the police. There is no confidence in the police. And you see, the issue of, you know, we against them shouldn't be. I think people should get involved in security, not leaving it to the police alone or to our security forces. It's very important we emphasize this because everybody is involved, everybody is affected, so we'll continue to have these issues with police. And we have said this times without number. Police is ill-equipped, underfunded, ill-trained, you know, to tackle the challenges. So we need to get more funds, not just getting funds for the police and the security forces, but again, monitoring, oversight function to see how these monies are spent. Because we've had cases where the new chief of army staff was at the National Assembly and he was asked questions. Instead of answering, he said they should go and call the former. I think there should be a teamwork in the leadership of the various security agencies. Government is about continuity. Life is about continuity. It should have, if he was carried along, I think he should have been in a position to say, yes, armament were bought, some were using, some were not using, but he was not in a position to answer that question. So it becomes a problem. So the leadership needs to carry their subordinates along in planning their operations.
That's a very serious one there, Mr. Joffo. But let me take this to Mr. Amabogunje. Well, you're a security engineer, and you most certainly have an idea of what we've been talking about for quite a while. And you have also been seeing the news, seeing all of the issues that have been rising. It would seem like for every pronouncement of government, whether at the federal level or at the state level, it would seem like the criminals just intensify their efforts just to show that they're in control. Or I don't even know how to place those words. What, in your opinion, is going on? What are we missing? Or are we just playing the ostrich?
Thank you very much, Mr. Makinde. I think that there is a fundamental problem with the mindset and our orientation in this country with regards to security. And I think it started as far back as a colonial period, where the focus of security was more in protecting the colonial powers, and the people were seen as part of those to be protected against. So the issue of protecting those in power or the regime in power, as opposed to protecting the people, has always been the mindset of our security agencies going forward. Today we talk about the difference between national security and human security, where national security is more concerned about the protection of the state. You know, they want to maintain the sovereignty and survival of the state through the use of economic power, diplomacy, intelligence gathering. Security threats to the state are what they focus on. Human security, on the other hand, is commonly understood as prioritizing the security of people, especially their safety, their welfare, and well-being, rather than that of the state. It kind of gives a primacy to human beings and their complex social and economic interactions. And you can see from how our police are more interested in protecting those in power and even their cronies. When you have a police force of about 400,000, and more than 100,000 of them are protecting individuals, leaving the balance to protect the remaining 200 million people. I think the understanding of security has to shift from protecting people in power to protecting the human beings in that country. Also, we have to understand that security is much more than what the security agencies alone do. Everything is about security. Infrastructure aids security. When you have roads that are in such poor shape, you don't have street lights, you don't have regular electricity supply, all these things impinge on security. And the point you made earlier on is very critical. The number one cause of insecurity is actually unemployment, without a doubt. The number two thing that I will talk about is the social tension in the country. And the number three is the politics of power in Nigeria. But much more important to me is that of unemployment. Because if jobs were created and people were employed, like they say, the devil finds work for idle hands. If people are not productively engaged, they're going to want to survive, and they're going to do whatever it takes to survive.
Well, that fact, Mr. Mabukunje, clearly isn't lost on government at various levels, just as you know, because we've been talking about that for a bit. But there's a lot more on this, the strategy angle, the focus, the primary focus of our security strategy right now, which you have highlighted earlier. And what can be done about it, or what has been done about it, or what is being done about it, we'll find out after the break. Stay with us. Thank you for staying with us. It is one thing to have to fight insecurity. It's another thing to understand the impact on the people who have been so affected. Well, Dr. Onaihomo has since joined in the conversation. He is a security consultant. Let's have his opening comments as well. Thanks for joining us, Dr. Homo. I don't know if you want to begin by even reacting to what you have heard in this report now, especially the effect, the after effect of abduction on complete communities across the land.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ayo, for having me. And good morning to my fellow panelists, my brothers in the studio there with you. I'd just like to say, before I deal with the problem of impact, which is an outcome thing, let us look first at the architecture, your topic, rethinking security strategies. Let's look at that architecture. You see, that's where the problem is, because if we don't prevent acts of insecurity, then we are going to have to deal with the impact. So that's why I think impact is a downstream activity. So let us look at the architecture.
Now, just 1 second. Just 1 second, Dr. Homo. I get it. And there is no way we can remonstrate that aspect. As a matter of fact, there was something that Mr. Mabukunje mentioned about the focus of security. But I just wanted us to even understand the impact. Perhaps some government official listening to us right now will know that if we do not rethink these strategies, the impact is not just for now, but it's going to be for very many years to come. That's why I'm just, what is the summary, in your own opinion, of that? Then we now begin to talk about what we need to do so that those impacts are not replicated.
All right, thanks. I appreciate the redirect. Now, the point here is we have become so adept at carrying dead bodies in Nigeria that it's no longer news to us. We're so used to it That means we are used to dealing with impact, not even in an intelligent format. We're just used to going there, carrying dead bodies and saying, oh my sheo, and then moving on with our lives. So we don't even have a way of dealing with the actual, we don't have a structure. I think that's really what it is. We don't have a structure of dealing with the impact of these attacks. For example, each attack by whether it's Kankara, Kagara, you just, Mr. Simon the Emperor just talked about in that report, whether it's Jangabe, whether it's Afaka, or whether it's even the ongoing Greenfield University, you know, each one is a discrete event which leaves very deep scars on the victims. Now, the way to heal, I heard the commissioner say that, we need to look at the psychosocial effect of this on the students. Well, the real problem is not just the psychosocial effect. What went wrong? What went wrong? What was missing in the whole equation that we got to where we were? And then how can we prevent that from occurring further? It's not about shedding a lot of crocodile tears or, you know, maybe about, for example, we know that all the schools we've seen attacked recently. I'm just using schools as a case point because Emperor talked about Kagara. Now, all the schools we've seen that they are not fenced, they don't have security awareness, they were poorly defended, and so on and so forth. Now, there was a school in Kaduna where the bandits went to because there was some kind of an arrangement in place where they could call out the authorities. The bandits were not able to take anybody away. So the problem is, why is it that a school in Chikun local government, a university in Chikun local government that knows that it's in the hot zone of terrorist attacks, why is it that it was poorly defended, leading to the attack of, you know, the sitting of children from that school recently, and the 3 that we found dead yesterday? So what I'm saying is that look, you talk about deaths, you talk about rape scars, you talk about deprivation of liberty, you talk about destruction of property, destruction of lives, and so on and so forth. Those are the most obvious direct impact that you see. But down the line, you talk about people not denying students from the northern Nigeria education, because what is happening, more recent research I'm saying, is that it's depressing education. Parents are not letting their kids go to school because they don't want them to be kidnapped and create emotional turmoil for them. But having said that, Makinde, if you give me a second, I want to say that the problem here is that we are, Nigeria is so focused on a threat-based strategy of insecurity rather than a risk-based strategy. You see, when you do a threat-based strategy, you wait like we normally do, and when it happens, you now scramble security operatives there and to see what they can do, and then you make a lot of statements. Politicians are accused, parties cross-accused, make reckless statements up and down, even give our country a bad name and in the international community and all that. Now, that is our strategy. Rather than taking a long look, for example, look at what is happening in Nigeria's northeast border right now. We have a failed state syndrome about to occur. Now, we should be, our security forces should really be moving troops into that region right now, massing troops there, such that we can deter bandits and militia from Chad from entering this country. But, I mean, I don't know, I'm sure probably the military high command is thinking about it, but that is a risk-based strategy. You look at what is going to go wrong in some short time, in some short order, or even in some long order. We call it risk mapping. You know, you look at what is going to go wrong, and then you prepare for it and make contingency plans and take action so that you don't have to deal with the consequences. Now, that's what I'm saying, the impact. You don't have to deal with the impact that you're talking about here today.
Dr. Omo, what you said earlier and even what you said now points to one thing, or at least referenced something that Mr. Mabukunje mentioned earlier, which is the protectionist tendency or strategy or direction of our security apparatus at the moment. Do these things that you have said now, the threat-based as opposed to risk-based, the fact that we are more interested in protecting the state as opposed to protecting the people? Does it in any way indicate what some of these impacts that you have just enumerated?
No, my threat-based and risk-based strategies is that we are solving the wrong problems, or we are solving the unimportant problems. In terms of choice of who to protect, that is a policy issue. That is a policy that is made by police high command or the military high command, whoever is making those policies. But I'm saying as an aggregation, entire security infrastructure, how do we think about it? And that's why I gave you the example of Chad, that look at that one is imploding there. It's our problem. And beyond even the security, what is our diplomatic trust there? Nigeria, for goodness sake, is a regional power, whether we accept our destiny or not. We're a regional power. We should act like one. Something is happening at our doorstep, and in short order, it's going to affect us. But we stay aloof. We don't want to do anything. And then when it boils over, when the people start coming into Borno State, and coming into Adamawa State, and then maybe people coming into Enugu State, we now say, there's a problem in Nigeria. That is a threat-based strategy. You wait for it to blow up in your face, then you go and carry dead bodies. But if you anticipate that this could happen, we have 3 A's, anticipation, awareness, then action. You know, if you anticipate it, because you are aware, you spread the information, and then you take action. You know, you stay ahead of the problem. That is what security is about. Security is not about carrying dead bodies. That is for disaster management people. That's for NSCDC and maybe the other agency, the other one that does disaster management. Security is about preventing it from happening in the first place. That's what I'm saying, sir.
Mr. Jeffo, you are a former DSS official. Can you speak to some of the issues that Dr. Hobo and Mr. Mabogunje have raised about the fact that on the one hand, we seem to react as opposed to prevent, you know, some of these things happening? He talked about threat-based strategy as opposed to risk-based strategy. Is that what we do?
You see, the problem is that in intelligence, for instance, intelligence gathering, you have 4 stages. You have the direction, which is very critical. So what are the managers of these security agencies doing? We continue to emphasize on the police, because police is the statutory body charged with maintenance of internal security. If the police fails, then we're all in trouble. Look at, like Magobi just said, we have about 400,000. I'm not sure they're up to now because people are retiring. And out of this 400,000, you have more than 120,000 deployed to individuals and VIPs. It becomes a problem. I think I once said it on this place. Some politicians started calling me whether I want them killed because I called for withdrawal of police. I don't move out with anybody. I move out because they move out with, you see, it's about attitude. We need to have attitudinal change. If you live right with God and with your fellow human beings, you don't need all this retinue of policemen. So, like Shehu said, it's better to protect the state than to protect individuals. So to some extent, I agree with them that we are not setting our priorities right. The issue is, like the new IG, any new IG that comes, we'll give this order, withdraw all the details, withdraw all the next 1 month, they're all back to their posts. So where do you have, we're saying that we don't have sufficient policemen to man the country because of the security challenges we're facing. And yet, they are deployed to individuals. And you see some of them carrying bags, you know, for women as if they're housemates. So that's the point I'm making, that the IG needs to change the image, most importantly, and build confidence of the people for them to at least come to the police and say, we have information to give. Because I also continue to emphasize that security should not be left for security agencies alone. Everybody is involved. If you are not safe in your family or your house, there's no way you can carry out with your business. So the police also needs to re-strategize.
Yes, just one moment,
we continue to encourage them.
On that which is said about the people playing their role, you are not unaware in the same country not too long ago, and perhaps still happening, where some communities have said that they gave information to the police, but the bandits came and attacked them simply because they gave information to security officers. So if people do not have enough confidence in the fact that the security apparatus will protect them, how will they give information to the security officials in a way that will jeopardize them?
No, that's the point. You know, in some areas, like the threats are segmented. If you look at the northeast or the northwest, where you have kidnapping, where bandits reign supreme and freely, yes, the communities will be afraid to give information because you have insufficient manpower in the first place to protect that environment. So if you give information and some of them too, some of the people who volunteer this information make it as a point of pride. We have given information, these people are coming to there, and they take revenge on the people. So it's a problem. But I believe that if you want to give information to the police, they have dedicated lines. With the social media, it's easier to reach the police without even coming there physically. So I think we need to redirect, and the direction should come from the police. They should take the initiative to redirect the people and build their confidence.
Now, you also talked about what's something Mr. Mabogunje mentioned the other time, which is the fact that security is focused at protecting the state as opposed to protecting the people. But don't also forget, I think it was in 2019 that the National Security Advisor, released that new national security policy, which says that, it will now be more people-centric as opposed to state-centric. Do you think we've been able to do anything about that?
We've not been able. Those are paperwork. Nothing has changed. And that strategy looks very good on paper, but nothing has changed. We are still going, okay, where are the policemen to work? The last IG, immediate past IG, I remember I commended him in this studio for withdrawing people, but within 1 month, they are all back. So we need to be serious in this country. Take the security of the people, because the primary purpose of government is security and welfare of the people. If government cannot do that, that government is not supposed to be called a government. And we need to reprioritize our strategies. Like you're talking, rethinking the security strategies. Let us protect the people more than protecting government officials. Regime protection, if you like.
Well, Mr. Mabungje, you mentioned that this is what we have focused on until now, and we need to rethink it. In rethinking, what are the things that are necessary? You raised the issue the other time about the number of policemen that are assigned to, well, some people have banded figures less than 400,000, and you have said about something in the region of 30–35% of that number is reserved for VIPs all over the country. But don't also forget that in the balance, we have those who are almost always in the office, the admin staff, the drivers, and, security for the various posts, the national headquarters of the police and the rest of them. So in rethinking our strategy, what really should we focus on? And not just the policy now, and the things that we need to do to effect those policies.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Makinde. When we talk security, strategy in general, we have to first of all understand what are the threats. We identify the threats. What is required to mitigate these threats in manpower, in resources, in capability, in understanding, in intelligence. The focus will then be on how to provide, because everybody keeps attacking the police, and I think the police too need some protection. How much are the police being paid? How are they motivated? What is their welfare condition? How are they able to provide security when they themselves are threatened? It has to be a very holistic. What are the resources that support them? What is the database that they can plug into? What is the forensic aspects that they can use to detect and analyze and make predictions on crime? The strategy has to be all-encompassing, because everybody has a role to play in security. Like I said earlier, every ministry, if they're doing their work well, they will reduce the security challenges of the country. If the roads in Nigeria are good, well lit at night, you will reduce security. If there's ample water supply for all the citizens, the need to look for water all over the place will reduce. Housing, everybody plays a part in the security strategy. It's not just the security agencies. In fact, like Mr. Ejiofor said, the security agencies are at best a reactive force when the incident has happened. But how do we prevent those incidences from happening? I like what Mr. Ekomu said, my friend Ona, about risk-based and threat-based thinking. Because what we're saying is that with risk-based, you are thinking ahead. What are the problems? How do we plan to mitigate those problems? What resources do we need to deploy? What policies do we need to put in place? All this kind of thinking is what will determine how much commitment government has to make in its budget or whatever it is they do, long-term, mid-term, to provide what the police and other security agencies need to counter the seeming threat. I don't see that happening. Okay. I don't see anybody thinking ahead.
Just one moment.
It's very boring because...
Just one moment, Mr. Babogunje. I have so much that I would like you to unpack in a few things that you said both earlier and just now, but we'll expatiate that a little more when we return right now. Do stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. Mr. Babogunje, it will seem like the threats are not abating. I mean, the issues we have on our hands, we are still contending with. And then there are also other threats. I mean, from what the Minister of Police Affairs just said, threats coming from Libya that will come to Nigeria unless, without the mitigating force in Chad. But before we go to that one, there are some things that you said earlier, and that's the fact that our focus, the security apparatus we have, our security strategy now is to protect the state as opposed to protecting the people. Clearly, one would think that perhaps that hasn't really worked for us over the years, or has it?
Well, let me be clear. Both are important. It is necessary to protect the state, and it's also necessary to protect the people. Because we don't want, the threat from Chad now, we should have anticipated it long ago. When Libya fell, right? When all the rebels were coming in to attack Chad, it shouldn't have caught us, it shouldn't have taken us by surprise. If our intelligence gathering, external intelligence agencies were doing their work, we should have been prepared for this. There's a lot of instability and failed state syndrome around Nigeria today. Even Niger Republic, they had a coup there, an unsuccessful coup there not too long ago. In neighboring Cameroon, there's a civil war going on there. All these things, they are our neighbors, they are at our doorsteps. In the Gulf of Guinea, there's a problem. The piracy there is increasing. It's not news. By now, we should have a risk-based approach to these things. What if? We should create what-if scenarios. This is going to, if this happens, what would be our response to it? What capabilities do we need to put in place to protect us against these emerging threats? It's not when the threats become real that we start reacting. That's a reactive response. So a lot has to be done in seen ahead by any government, not 5 years, 10 years. Scenarios need to be created. What do we do if this happens? What is the likelihood that this will happen? what do we need to have in place that if this happens, we can mitigate it? Because nobody can guarantee, that the security situation will remain stable. West Africa region right now is under a lot of threat. Now, when you now juxtapose that with our own internal security issues, it paints a very, very worrying picture. It paints a really worrying picture because our internal capacity to even respond to our own internal threats. I mean, when I use the issues of numbers, we have to look at the numbers in this country. We have a population of 200 million. We have a land mass of almost 1 million square kilometers. What is the, if you do a footprint of the security agencies on this country, you will see that we are grossly and inadequately policed. We are grossly and inadequately secured. We have a lot of ungoverned spaces all over the country. And as the economy continues to nosedive, we are going to create a situation where more and more criminals occupy these ungoverned spaces. And there will not be enough resources, enough foot on the ground to handle the security challenges of this country. And now we have the external one too. I am concerned and I am worried.
Well, Dr. Homo, I'm almost certain you are as concerned, if not more so, with all of the internal and external threats that we are faced with right now. So if you would make recommendations, and I know, of course, you've done this for so many years, but, the facts, the figures, they are right in our faces. If you would recommend urgent steps that will help us mitigate worse scenarios, what would it be? I mean, right now, as you started out by pointing us to, and Mr. Mabogunje has expatiated on, there are risks all around. There are not threats yet, if I'm to go by what the way you put it earlier. There are risks all around from external angles, and we all know, how easily or not it is to come into the country. And there are those internal threats that are still right there in our faces in various parts of the country. Talking about immediate steps and what we can call preemptive steps, what would you recommend?
Thank you very much, Mr. Ayo, for your kind question. Well, I think we have issues that recommendation. I think number one is enrollment of every citizen of Nigeria in the security program. Somebody mentioned the NSSD document, just a National Security Strategies document, and he said that document is going to be people-based rather than state-based. Yes, you're right. It could be people-based, but they didn't enroll us. They didn't tell us about it, So you have to, it's not just an elite document. I think Director Jafar said it's grammar. It's not just an elite document. It should be a document that is put in the public domain that NOA will take over and own and popularize to the citizenry, and then make all kinds of jingles here. So, but what is it? Let's put a security context to it. We should have Nigerians focus on getting us TAPIs. TAPIs are terrorist attack pre-incident indicators. This is from Director Jafar's angle, intelligence item. Now, because he started talking about the intelligence gathering structure, collection, and directing, and other things that we do in intelligence work. Now, but the most important thing there is the pre-incident, because you are saying what are the things that will tell us that something is about to go wrong. Using a people-based structure, using a people-based security structure, you need to go to TAPIs. So you have to let people know what are those things that will indicate that there is a terrorist attack or some kind of maybe an ungoverned space being taken over by criminals. Because if that is brought out earlier and is combated, then that, of course, will help us reduce this incident. Because like Shehu said just now, he said, look, the economy is nosediving. So this problem is going to exacerbate. It's going to get worse. So what do we need to do? We need to create a level environment. Development cannot take place without security. So you must arrest insecurity so that Nigerians will now unleash their productive capacity. I was glad this week to hear that Apple bought an app from a Nigerian for $1 billion. That's the kind of energy I want to see in this country, not a separatist, terrorist, insurgent agenda that is taking over the airwaves in this country. And I think the media should also try not to give too much oxygen to all these bad guys, because if the media keeps making it appear as if they are sexy, that's how ISIS and ISWAP and Boko Haram grew, because they were made to look sexy to young people who bought their rap and then joined them in creating havoc.
Well, thank you for that one. Well, Mr. Jaffor, what would be your take? One of the things that we have heard over and over again, even from the intelligence community, is that unemployment is a major catalyst for insecurity. From the intelligence angle, what would be your recommendation as to how government should facilitate employment in a way that it can help mitigate some of these risks as far as insecurity is concerned?
I agree, but not completely, that unemployment is one of the causes of our security challenges. The major causes actually is political, ethnic and religious issues. More than 70% of our problems are politically generated. So what I would recommend is that in addition to what Dr. Honor said, that people should own the security, not leaving it to security agencies. We should all get involved. Our politicians too should guard the utterances. The utterances that are capable of inflaming passion. We are heading towards 2023. We have a lot of security challenges facing us. We have not even handled them. And come and add political dimension to it, it's going to be worse. So our appeal to our politicians to be cautious. Most importantly, they should be cautious. In addition to government providing employment and social services to the people, like Shehu said, the idle mind is the devil's workshop. Yeah, to some extent, but there are some people who are not even ready to work. Even if you provide that employment, they are not ready to work. Some people are just criminals by nature. There's nothing you do, they'll get involved in it. But in conclusion, I think our politicians should be very cautious on their utterances, which is generating and hitting up the polity.
Staying on the politicians' angle, quite a few times, governors in different parts of the country, from the north, from the southwest, from the southeast, have come out to say over and over again that politicians are sometimes responsible for some of these insecurity issues that arise. Perhaps, I want to guess that their position has come as a result of intelligence information that is given to them perhaps from the DSS and other security reports that they get on a regular basis. I'm wondering what you think we should be doing to deal with that in line with what you have just said about the politicians guarding their utterances, because I think the governor of Zamfara has mentioned specifically and said, look, we know some politicians that are behind this thing. Even the president at some point said, look, we are hoping to be able to convert some of the politicians that are making some of these incendiary comments or fueling some of these, unrests and insecurities across the country. What should we be doing? Shouldn't they be already rounded up?
The governors making the statement, are they not politicians? They are politicians. They are also making political statements. Some of them make statements without even backing up their claims. So the point I'm making is that politics is about service to the people. You don't have to kill the people for you to ascend to power. So when they make such statements, you know, without substantiating it, it becomes a problem. And people will take on them to say, please, come and elaborate on what you have said. And then you see at the end of it, it's not the issue of intelligence, like you said. If you offer intelligence, is there the political will to execute the intelligence provided? Some of them for political reasons. That's why I say it's politically generated. We decide not to even implement the intelligence we offer to them for their personal reasons. So we should think about Nigeria first before thinking of self.
Mr. Mabugunje, what's your take on that? I mean, I'm at a loss, because if politicians, governors who are politicians and in government, make comments along the line of the fact that they have been able to identify certain elements who are politicians fueling some of this security, some of these unrests, some of the insecurity issues that we've been having from time to time, what should be done?
Well, you know, if truth should be told, there's a problem with the political class. Their focus is about capturing power, state capture, and they will do anything to get into power. Not necessarily because they want to serve the people, or because being in power gives them access to the treasury, makes them relevant, and all sorts of things. So they play a lot of games, all towards capturing power. A lot of the miscreants we have in societies today were recruited by the politicians. We know this. They were, it started, I think the first instance was in the River State, where they brought in militants, armed them, all towards taking over power. And after the election, after they were in power, what happens to them? These are trained hoodlums with guns and whatever. They are unleashed onto the masses. Same thing happened in Borno State. You know, so all over the place, the politicians fuel the crisis. And once they get into power, they just focus on the spoils of the office, so to speak. So I think that's the situation we are in today, that the politicians are part of the problem because of their attitude to power, not service. Because if they were looking out for service, we would see the sincerity of purpose, not just words that we hear and listen to every time. There is nothing to show that the words that our politicians say on television, in the papers, are ever backed by action. So I find it very difficult to believe that the politicians are out to salvage the country. I don't see enough seriousness. I don't see enough sincerity. I don't see enough leadership coming from them. And that's the truth from my perspective.
All right. Dr. Ahomo, you've heard this as well before, still talking about staying with the political class. And how significant would you say that the political class is? Because politicians mention politicians as being culpable in the insecurity that we have. So how significant do you think the involvement of politics or politicians is in the fight against insecurity? And what should we be doing, not just saying, to combat that end?
Thank you very much, Mr. Ayo, for that intelligent question. I think this shows that there's a problem with our law enforcement agencies, with the security agencies, if I may. Now, anybody that goes out there and makes a statement, and that statement is in the public sphere, that that statement should be documented, it should be gripped, recorded, whatever. Now, there should be a security executive somewhere, a commissioner of police, a military commander, if the statement has to do with military or has to do with something that is in the sphere of the military, or intelligence official, if a statement has to do with intelligence assets or intelligence information. that there should be somebody there. If a statement is outlandish, is very broad and is very grave, is severe, somebody should go and invite that executive. This is and invite that executive and say, well, can you please substantiate this? It's because there is no consequence for being reckless in Nigeria. That is why this is going on. Now, Sheldon spoke about what happened in Rivers State and what happened in Borno State, how politicians in those states built up armies that they used for election and abandoned them, and those armies have become part of the security threats that we have in Nigeria. One that I've documented in my book is the one on Boko Haram in the Northeast, where some politicians use them to win office, and after winning office, they turn their back on them, and a blood feud, emerged, and which has given us this crisis that we had now for 11, perhaps going on to 12 years. In July this year, to be 12 years. So what I'm saying is, these people are still alive and they are here. Who is calling them to question that, hey, we have record, we have evidence that you recruited, let's say, Mohammed Yusuf to campaign for you and do this, and you sponsored specific acts of violence, even just one. It doesn't have to be many. You know, that's the thing about Nigeria. We are overwhelmed by evidence. Just only one act of violence or one act of, what is it called, defalcation is all that you need. And if you have enough evidence, that person can be brought on trial. Now, Ayo, let me just tell you something here. If we don't try the first politician or the first individual on these kinds of issues and perhaps jail him or shame him or whatever, it's going to continue because it's benefiting them. They can do it, get away with it, and gain power, and like Shehu said, enjoy the perks of office. So which one be their own? So what I'm saying is, we must make an example of somebody so that this will come down.
Well, gentlemen, again, it's an ongoing conversation. I wish I could say that, well, this conversation has come to an end, but for now, we have to thank you very much. Some significant issues have been raised, and most certainly the angle of law enforcement, angle of the states, angle of the policy, security policy, and so many other issues. I have to thank you very much, gentlemen, for being here. Mike Ejiofor is a former DSS official. He joined us from our Abuja studio, while Oluseun Magbogunje, a security engineer, and Ona Ehomo, a security consultant, both joined us virtually. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time and your service to the country. We're back in a moment. Do stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. Well, countries around the world continue to vaccinate or immunize their citizens against the coronavirus. Well, it's that time of the year again that we reiterate the importance of vaccines. Last week, every year, the last week of April in every year is set aside to celebrate World Vaccination Week or World Immunization Week, whichever one you prefer. Now, the week is used to promote the use of vaccines to protect people of all ages against the disease. Now, the theme for this year is Vaccines Bring Us Closer. How? Let's begin the conversation with Dr. Tunji Funsho, who is chair of Rotary's Nigeria National Polio Plus Committee. Thanks for joining us this morning. So first of all, over the years, vaccines, how well would you say vaccine has helped? Because one of the issues that you very well know, Doc, is vaccine hesitancy is still an issue globally.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a great opportunity for me, yes, to try as much as possible in my own little way to debunk, some of these conspiracy theories about vaccines. What have vaccines done? Vaccines have been the singular weapon that has helped us to reduce particularly childhood and infant mortality by almost 50% in developing countries in the last 2 decades. So we know vaccines work, they are safe. They've been around for a very, very long time. And we have shown by the fact that it's vaccines that we used, the oral polio vaccine, and in some cases the injectable polio vaccine that we have used in eradicating polio from Nigeria and as a consequence from the African continent. So we know it works. We also know that it is safe because we've not had any serious adverse effect as a result, of polio vaccination. If you think about some of the most popularly known infections in childhood, measles is apparently the most dramatic. And also, it's also, one of the diseases that also causes deaths and all kinds of nerve malformations, eye complications, and so on. We have been able to control measles, by and large, using vaccines. We see the experience in the United States and parts of Europe when, anti-vaxxers, those are people opposed to vaccination in general, started opposing, the use of the measles vaccine in their children. And we saw a resurgence of measles in the United States and Europe that they've not seen for decades. So we know vaccines work. But also now, as far as COVID is concerned, COVID-19 is concerned, we also know that they're not only efficient, but they're also safe.
Well, we'll come to the COVID-19 part in a bit, but still speaking globally about vaccination, the practice over the years. On the one hand is the activity and the effectiveness. On the other hand, the fact of producing. Now, one of the things that's come in public space about this conversation concerning vaccines or vaccination is that there are some situations, some conditions that have been with us in Africa for decades, but we've not been able to develop strong enough or effective enough vaccine against, against them. And you might also want to mention a few of them. One that readily comes to my mind is how significantly or how effectively we've been able to get a vaccine against malaria and so many others like that. But we'll still talk about malaria later in the day. But that is one thing that's giving some people some concern. How come some extremely difficult conditions do not have vaccines, yet some others have?
First of all, we must remember that the process of producing vaccines is a very long, tedious, and very expensive one. Until, those people living in the parts of the world where some of these diseases you've mentioned, particularly malaria, have the wherewithal and also invest in providing these vaccines, will be a long way, from finding the appropriate vaccines for, say, for instance, malaria. I'm delighted to say that we have a malaria vaccine currently, under trial, and is showing a lot of promise. But again, it is not funded from, the malaria part of the world. It's being funded, from countries that don't have, cases of malaria. Pharmaceutical companies have an interest in ensuring that their shareholders get returns on their investment. So we must never forget that. So until such a time that we invest, those of us in the part of the world that have some of these diseases that you're mentioning, until we start to invest in the production, in the research and production of vaccines, will be a long way, from, getting all of these vaccines. We used to have a vaccine production center in Yaba some 3-4 decades ago, if call, which has gone moribund. It's like I said, it's an expensive venture, and therefore, if governments don't really invest it'll be very difficult to find pharmaceutical companies who will invest in something that they don't see much profit coming out of it, both in the medium and long term.
Very interesting. Seeing that, I don't know. I'm trying to check now. I don't know if we have such a condition, such a vaccine for HIV/AIDS as well, which was kind of as serious back in time. But talking about profit for the big pharma and all of that, there are quite a number of conditions in our part of the world, for instance, that continue to affect us every year. It's like there's a season, or there's a weather that some of them come up, and over the years. And is it because it's not profitable for the big pharma, or global big pharma, or that the countries themselves, African countries in particular, are not willing to take them on? Take Lassa fever, for instance. And I don't even want to go into the figures of the fatalities of Lassa fever over the years. Ebola is still somewhere latent, somewhere. God forbid that it comes up again. So what is really beside this, the profit end? Isn't there something governments of Africa could be able to do to stem this tide?
Definitely. There are resources in Africa. There are development, organizations like the African Development Bank, for instance. We just need the will to make a conscious decision. Having learned, from our current experience, with begging, cap in hand, for COVID-19 vaccine, and waiting until, those, who have invested, in the vaccines long ahead of us, get their fill before we get the crumbs, from their tables. I think, there's an urgent need for an initiative coming out of Africa, to tackle, some of these diseases with vaccines. That is not to say that, it's easy to provide vaccine for every disease. There are also, technical hurdles that prevent, certain diseases being amenable to use by vaccines, because the infecting agent is not stable. In other words, as we have seen with COVID-19, you have one variant, you produce a vaccine against it, and within a short period of time, that variant, in an attempt to survive the onslaught against it, mutates and now produce a new creature that you now need to produce another vaccine, against. So sometimes, there are technical issues that bedevils the production of vaccines for certain kind of diseases. But there are quite a number that with a lot of investment, the will, particularly, political will on the part of governments in Africa to bring resources together and tackle those common diseases that afflict our people, that this thing can be done. And I think, there's quite a bit of discussion already going on now in view of, our humiliation as regards consignments of COVID-19 vaccines.
Humiliation, interesting word, doctor. But let me take you back take you up on what you mentioned about the mutation of those viruses. It's something that science knew would happen. And as a result of that, some people are there is a number of, there are some opinions out there, some hypotheses, some theories out there by some people that, look, if I still have to take all the precautions that I needed to take before taking the vaccines, after I take the vaccines, then what's the point of taking the vaccines?
Well, yes, and sometimes, people express these opinions and take things out of context. Number one, controlling an epidemic disease is a public health issue. It's not an individual issue. In other words, you're not just thinking about one individual, you're talking about, a population, particularly those populations that are close together, say in a town, or in a village, or in a country. So if you take the COVID-19 vaccine, you are protected against, falling ill as a result of the immunity that the vaccine confers on you. But it does not stop, the virus getting to you and replicating, for instance, in your upper nasal passages. If you do not wear a mask, people around you stand the risk of being infected by you if they are not fully immunized. This is why we're talking about getting to herd immunity. And when we get to a point where about 65 to 70% of the population are fully immunized, then the need for these precautions will now start to wane, and the authorities will now give guidelines as to what we need to do. But until such a time that you are sure that the person you're meeting is immunized, you're a danger to that person. That is the most important reason why we asked to continue observing these protocols. Again, if you wear a mask, then the risk of getting this virus into your upper respiratory passage that you might use in infecting somebody else is taken care of. So those are the two basic reasons. The vaccine protects you, but we want the environment protected. We want those who have not been immunized protected as well, because this is a public health issue. It is not an individual issue. Until such a point, like I said, we get to the critical mass of what we call herd immunity, that enough number of people have been immunized that the virus will not find any host where it can settle and cause disease. We have to continue observing these protocols.
Let me also take you up on that word you used earlier, national embarrassment of sorts concerning the vaccines, And you also mentioned, and everybody knows it, that we had a vaccine production system back in time. What happened, if you can hazard a guess, or if there is something that you want to tell us? And what do we need to do to never get back there? Because you very well know that some people are already positing that this is not going to be the last pandemic.
Oh, definitely. This pandemic was predicted about a decade or more ago, because you can see the trend. It's not difficult to predict these things. Pandemics are not new to human society. Now, I don't know precisely, what happened to our vaccine production unit in Lagos. But you see, like I mentioned earlier with regard to vaccine production, I don't think there's no government anywhere that produces vaccines. Vaccines are produced by the private sector because there has to be some form of inducement and motivation and continuity. In this country and in most of Africa, our governments are notorious for lack of continuity, either because of, because party changes, and usually that's the reason, and the new government decides to go in a different trajectory entirely, both at the state and national level. So it would be important, for government can be a catalyst to start the movement, for the private sector, to come on board. And like they're doing for other, parts of our manufacturing sector, give them incentives, give them tax breaks, but also, assure them of a market. Because if you ask a company to produce, vaccines and they put in a lot of investment, as I said, it's, there's a huge cost, into research and development of vaccine. So if we ensure that we provide that enabling environment for the private sector to take things up, they want to make money, so they'll come in there. So basically, is to say that government should not be in the business of production. government should be in the business of enabling production by the private sector. And I think we've seen a lot of very fruitful example in other areas, economy, when the government, provides an enabling environment for entrepreneurs, in the private sector to come in and produce.
Well, it's a fine place to leave that conversation, Dr. Funshaw. We do thank you very much for your perspectives and wish you all the best in further endeavors. Dr. Tunji Funshaw is chair of Rotary's Nigeria National Polio Plus Committee. Thank you again for your time.
Thank you very much for having me. Just to remind people to continue immunizing their children against all the childhood preventable diseases. Thank you very much.
All right, then. So we take a break and we'll be right back. Thank you for staying with us. World Malaria Day takes place on the 25th day of April every year. Now, the day is celebrated to highlight the global efforts to control malaria, as well as celebrate the gains that have been made. However, the World Health Organization has launched an effort to stamp out malaria in 25 countries by 2025. Very ambitious, you would say. A good number of countries perhaps have been able to achieve, a lot of that. How well have we done and how far do we need to go? Let's take on a couple of guests that we have with us here. Mr. Chukwu Okoronkwo is Director and Head Advocacy, Communication and Social Mobilization for the National Malaria Elimination Program in the Federal Ministry of Health, along with Mr. Okefu Oyale Okoko, who is Deputy Director, Integrated Vector Management of the National Malaria Elimination Program, NMEP, in the Federal Ministry of Health. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this morning for this discussion. So, well, we have been at this for quite a while. Let me begin with you, Mr. Okoronkwo. How far so far? I mean, we've been talking about stamping out malaria since 1948. And right now, the program that we have on our hands, correct me if I'm wrong, is one that is supposed to stamp out malaria between 2017 and 2022, and that is next year. So how far so far?
Thank you very much, and thank you for having us here in this particular program. Yes, we've made some significant progress in the elimination of malaria. Of course, we are still at the control stage, unfortunately, but we've made some significant gains. First and foremost, in 2010, we were at 42% prevalence, but now that has reduced from that 42% to something like 27% in 2015, and as at 2018, we have reduced further to 23%. So we are gradually inching our way slowly towards making sure that malaria is not a scourge in this. And of course, to go with all these, there are significant indicators, progress in several indicators that we have seen over time, whether it has to do with usage of net, whether it has to do with pregnant women using preventive medicines, whether it has to do with seeking of care, especially by the very vulnerable group, and here we're talking about under 5s, we've seen some significant improvements. But we're still not there. We're still not out of the woods. We are not going to be eliminating malaria by 2022, definitely not. We're not going to be eliminating malaria by 2030. It does not seem very likely given all that. But we have also seen, when we look at the totality of the states, we have also seen that there are significant progress in some states. For example, in Lagos, the prevalence in Lagos is practically less than 1% or less than 2%. So of all the states, Lagos is making very good progress. Of course, we want to deep dive to understand what is happening in that particular area, but it's one of our star states as far as malaria control is concerned. So we have been making good progress.
Well, Mr. Koko, perhaps there are some things that people need to know about the malaria elimination program. Because, I mean, if you take a poll right now, in fact, you know, if you, those of you watching, you know, on television, you can just reach us on Twitter right now. Do you think it is possible to eliminate malaria from Nigeria altogether? You can just, you know, let us know that on our Twitter handle at Sunrise CTV. But in the meantime, Mr. Okoko, perhaps there are some things that people need to know about this malaria elimination program. We have been at it for many, many years. What is it that people need to know? Perhaps because people don't know it, so they are not able to take ownership of it and consequently play their parts.
Okay, thank you so much. Indeed, what people need to know about the malaria elimination program, first of all, that this is the program that has the mandate to coordinate all the activities that are related to delivering all the interventions that will get us on track to eliminating malaria. And I want everybody to know that the malaria program is also deploying several interventions, all divided into different thematic areas. Now we have the case management part of it, where we have a preventive arm to that, where we deliver medicines to pregnant women to prevent them from getting malaria. And that's one of the reasons why we encourage our pregnant women report to the ANC. That facility is available for you there, and it's free. And you don't need to pay any money for it. So long as you are there, you'll be given your dosage, and you are expected to take it, to swallow the medicine to prevent malaria. That's one. We also have the seasonal malaria chemo prevention. That one is happening in our Sahelian states. Over 10 states are classified under that group today based on some criteria. And that happens during the peak transmission season, when the rains are quite heavy in those areas, and children have the tendencies of getting malaria, suffering from severe malaria, dying from it. And over time, we have proven that when we deliver these interventions every month for 4 months, you know, within that period, the peak transmission season, they're protected, and many of them have been able to survive that period. Now, I've just talked about the case management bit. I've not even talked about diagnosis. We have diagnostic tools that are available, the rapid diagnostic tickets that we use to complement, you know, clinical diagnosis in the hospitals. And it's all available for people to take advantage of. All you need to do is get a report when you feel sick and you have fever. Let's find out if it is even malaria in the first place, because there are various other diseases that are responsible for causing fever in a person. Now, I'll go even into the advocacy, communication, and social mobilization. We're doing so much in that area as well. And all of that is harnessing all that we can to make sure people know about the disease, know where to report the disease, know what to do if they find somebody that has the disease. And this is an ongoing thing. We work with the communities at different levels of operation, and hope that this can get us to deliver interventions in an efficient manner.
Yeah, just one moment. Staying with the communities that you just mentioned now, do we have a sample community, you know, since we have been battling this malaria thing? Do we have a community that we can say, okay, we want to make this a sample community that say, we will eliminate malaria completely from this community as a sample of how malaria can be eliminated from every community in the country? Perhaps the inability or shortfall we've had is because it's so global that we look at it, you know, as such a big problem, and indeed it is, such that perhaps if we have a sample community that we focus on to eradicate it and then replicate the sample that we have in that community all across the nation. Have we ever given thought to that?
Well, maybe not in the way you have put it, but we have a lot of different pilot activities that are ongoing. Like you just mentioned, malaria is a big subject, and it's a big issue as far as Nigeria is concerned. Mr. Chukwu has just told us that Lagos is at 2% when it comes to prevalence. And I want us to know that the different states in the country are at different trajectories, different points in terms of their progress towards elimination. As I speak with you, we have a state in this country that is at 52%, and that is even despite the fact that it has received so much intervention. And we have the behavioral side of malaria, definitely. This is a big subject. We might not be able to discuss it in the time allotted for this activity, but I just want us to know there are different pilot activities that are going on. And it's good that you have muted this part on the social and behavioral change communication. We'll maybe have a pilot community where something is being done, but we have things like the interpersonal communicators and all of that spread across some states in the country which are receiving support today. The interpersonal communicators are people that have been engaged in the community to deliver malaria interventions on a door-to-door basis. They stay within the community. They give information about issues around malaria and ensure that people are complying with the expectations of the project. So, so far, except if Mr. Chukwu will have something to add to that.
Well, before Mr. Chukwu Okoronkwo adds to that one, I'd like to take him up on something, different, and he may want to weigh in on this one that you have mentioned as well. Well, Mr. Okoronkwo, Mr. Okoko mentioned the fact that people should go to certain designated places to discuss, malaria and all of that. But as well as I do that, so many people will be like, hey, come on, it's malaria. It's been with us for ages. How do we tell people who are used to a particular way of treating malaria? Malaria, it's a killer disease, but people don't even see it that way. That behavioral change perhaps starts from even attitude or perspective of what malaria is. How well are we doing in that regard? Because I don't know how many people would rather go to, these designated places that Mr. Okoko mentioned.
You're absolutely correct. It's one area that we are facing a lot of challenges. Behavior and attitude are things that are quite difficult to change. But I think we are seeing some progress, as we can see some of the indicators I had mentioned. Use of net is a question of behavior. Assessing treatments is a behavioral issue. So a lot of things associated with uptake of commodities, uptake of the various interventions that we are making now are all issues about behavior and attitude. And the fact that we are seeing some progress in those indicators means that something is happening. And as people are getting to realize that there needs to be a change. But you are definitely correct. It is still a big, big issue. People still think that malaria is still something as common. In fact, they believe that it is something that they need to live with. It is with us. And they believe that nobody can be free of the malaria parasite. You see, in fact, the common saying is that once you test anybody of malaria, you will see a malaria parasite, which is not true. So, but this is a part and parcel of the targeted interventions we are trying, SBC issues we are trying to get across, targeting various groups, subgroups, to be able to drive home this message. And that's part of what we are doing as part and parcel of the celebration of the World Malaria Day. So we are trying to make sure that we develop targeted messages and try to address specific subgroups so that we start that change starting from somewhere, especially in the most vulnerable group.
Well, Mr. Kongo, just one moment. Just a moment before you make that quick. There's something you said about Lagos the other time, and Mr. Koko has already also reiterated it, and that's the fact that the cases of malaria in Lagos has grossly reduced. Do you want to tell us, and you said that, Lagos is your star case. Do you want to tell us how Lagos, or how you were able to achieve that in Lagos, or how Lagos was able to achieve that feat.
Okay. Thank you very much. Lagos may have achieved that feat. We are yet to understand the various intermix of factors that contributed to that drastic reduction. We know definitely there are issues that has to do not just with behavioral issues, but also with developmental issues. We think development may have caused quite some bit to the reduction in prevalence. We also think that the fact that you have an uptake, that there is a big increase in uptake of commodities in Lagos is a cosmopolitan area. People are enlightened, they know what to do. When we look at some of our indicators that has to do with uptake of interventions, Lagos comes out well in most places, except maybe in the use of net. So we see that there were other interventions also that they do. For example, issues about screening of houses, which is very familiar with as a head of IVM. Other things, use of aerosols that people do in order to make sure that mosquitoes are killed. All these interventions, all this mix, I think, may have contributed to that drastic reduction. But as I said earlier on, that one of the first statements I made, that we are yet to take a very deep dive into the situation of Lagos to understand all the causative factors that made this possible. But we have an idea of some of these issues that may have contributed to the reduction. So now, if you want me, let me also take on the issue about the sample village.
We'll come to that particular one that you talked about.
Okay.
Well, we need to take a short break. We'll be right back. Well, thank you for staying with us. Well, yes, Mr. Koronko, you wanted to talk about the sample community proposition the other time. Please go ahead.
The fact that one of our stakeholders, the private sector, is a critical stakeholder in malaria elimination, is also thinking towards that concept of having some sample areas where they can do certain interventions. And they have outlined this in a plan which they have shared with us, and we are working with them to see how this unfolds. So what you have just said is something that already is being planned, working with the private sector. I just wanted to make sure that I highlight that.
Well, how will that plan be replicated? Perhaps that will be another question, because if we have not been able to understand how Lagos was able to achieve what it achieved, how then will we be able to replicate what the private sector does?
For me, that is clear, because now we are going in with specific interventions. We are going to be collecting baseline data before the interventions are made, and then we are going to be watching the progress being made in terms of after the deployment of those interventions. So that helps us to understand. Lagos is a huge area. Lagos is a huge area, and we understand that there are several things to do. Some kind of intensive survey or deep dive will require a lot of resources. But with this kind of thing, we can, I think, working with the private sector, we can be able to follow that, since we are looking at only a sample of villages, and we're going to be looking at a few number of people and seeing how this evolves over time. There's a deployment of something they call indoor residual spray. We'll be going to look at issues about intervention, other interventions that has to do with case management, diagnosis and case management. We're going to be looking at issues around behavior change and following up on all these issues and seeing how that is happening. Already, let me just say this, already there is also another kind of intervention also by the private sector. This is LNNG in Bonny Island in Rivers State. And that is also something that is happening, and we're trying to follow up on the progress being made, because there is something intensive, although some interventions are not being deployed, like IRS. So, but we're going to see the progress made in Bonny Island with all these interventions that they are doing, and see what we can learn from that distance and be able to replicate it. But in the case of the private sector, the plan is to deploy a whole lot more of interventions, and we should be able to track that.
Okay. Well, the Bonny Island example that you gave, for instance, Mr. Koronko, one of the questions, that might be interesting to get an answer to is, from your understanding of what needs to be done, how long do you think it will take to eradicate malaria from a community, from a particular community completely?
It depends on interventions. Let me give you straight one quick answer. There is one effective intervention that once it is deployed, it crashes malaria. That's been proven. That is scientifically correct. And that is the indoor residual spray. Once we're able to deploy indoor residual spray, just in the course of 1 year, targeted in, like we were talking about, for example, in a community, by the time we are looking at that community, we're going to be seeing a reduction in prevalence even in the course of that particular year. Looking at maybe in terms of over 2 years, if we continue in that, then of course we are going to see a lot much more. I won't want to say eradication, elimination completely, but we're going to be almost seeing maybe very close to something that we're seeing in Lagos in a period of 1 to 2 years. The challenge is sustaining that, because once you remove your foot from the pedal, there is a bounce back.
Okay.
So it is that sustenance of this IRS that is important, and its cost is very costly.
Well, Mr. Okoko, one of the things that many people know about the prevalence of malaria is that the issue is that of environment. People capitalize on what role we need to play in the environment to ensure that it doesn't get worse. So, if you were to, proffer, a guess, what are the things that you think we need to do? This is for Mr. Okoko. What are the things that you think we need to do in the communities, in the various communities, about the environment, while on the one hand protecting the environment, but on the other hand ensuring that malaria is not prevalent through the Anopheles mosquito?
So thank you for that. I was actually going to talk a little bit about integrated vector management before the diversion came in on the other issues. But let me speak a little bit about integrated vector management, and I'll zero in on the environment issue. And under the integrated vector management arm of the malaria elimination program, what we are doing is that we are attacking the vector. We are trying to make sure that human vector contact is as limited as possible. And we have various interventions that have been recognized and itemized in our national strategic plan. One of them is the mass distribution of ITNs, insecticide-treated nets, which a lot of people call LLINs as well. We do that periodically in different states, and we're also giving these ITNs on a routine basis at health facilities to pregnant women that come at their first visit and the children that complete their immunization. They get 1 free net at that point in time. Now, we also recognize the indoor residual spray. Like Mr. Chukwu has stressed repeatedly, it has been proven to be very effective. It's a core intervention in some countries, just like a distribution of mass ITNs is a core intervention in Nigeria. And now we are listing it as a complementary intervention as well in areas where we think it's feasible and will not pose any challenge. Now, we also have the lava source management. The lava source management is the core thing that is directed at the environment. It has 2 arms. We have the environmental manipulation and we have the environmental modification. The environmental manipulation are these simple things that I and you can do around our community. Keep our gutters clean, remove any source of stagnant water, empty cans and things like that. You cut the bushes around your houses and things like that. We expect that every individual would be able to at least deploy this kind of means to protect themselves from malaria. Now, in the environmental modification bit, this is more a bigger project, and that's where probably the government, the private sector, and philanthropic organizations are called upon. And that includes maybe digging of huge drainages and all of that to allow water drain efficiently, maybe after heavy rains and things like that. And I know that Lagos was one state that did something like that in a massive scale. Even in the 80s, early 90s, probably, they did that. And it has helped them in a lot of ways. The government of Lagos State have done well in some of these aspects. And I think all of these are contributory to what we are seeing in Lagos today. So these are just little things that we can do. The other thing that we encourage as far as the malaria program is concerned is people using personal protective equipment, measures to protect themselves. You are going to a place where you are exposed, you have a high risk of being bitten by mosquitoes. What can you do? Put on long clothing, go with little mosquito repellents, you could go with fleets, you know, those little things that you can do. Some people could screen their houses, put nettings in their windows and at their doors and all of that. All of this prevents the mosquitoes from coming in. And in brief, these are just some of the things that we encourage people to do.
Well, you may want to expatiate a little more on that, Mr. Okoko, because a message just came in now from David Folorunshojo on Twitter, who says, people live in slums. And that's why I mentioned, of course, you've talked about the environment a tiny bit, and some might say that some things that you have mentioned, they are to attack the threats. But perhaps protecting the environment might be a way of preventing the occurrence altogether. So when this young man says people live in slums, is there anything that government should be doing or is doing about that?
Yeah, so one of the things where we have also categorized in the different interventions we are giving is also taking a consideration of urban slums, like we call them. Yes, a lot of people live in slums. In fact, the majority of our people probably live around those areas. And one of the things we still encourage, it still has to do with the behavior. And keeping the environment clean is an important thing. Yes, the slums are unorganized. They probably don't have drainage systems across the entire place and things like that. But it now behoves on those that live in those places. You ensure that you don't have places where puddles of water will gather to encourage the breeding of these mosquitoes. These are little things you can do, whereas the government can take its own position to ensure that issues around town planning are properly put in place before people can move into a particular area. We see issues about demolitions happening these days, and it's all because places have not been properly planned and people just moved in and occupied the place. So the little things you can do for yourself, we encourage you to do it. Keep your environment clean. Cut the bushes around your house. Ensure that water does not gather. And receptacles that can keep water, make sure that they are not hanging here and there around your environment. Those are simple things that an individual can do and that can add on to your protection at the end of the day.
All right, well, Mr. Okoronkwo, the question that I would want to put to you now, in the light of tomorrow being World Malaria Day, is especially about the theme for the year. The theme for the year is Zero Malaria. Draw the line against malaria. Carrying people along is definitely an issue, and that's so happens to be right under your purview. So what are we doing to carry people along in this year's theme of Zero Malaria? Draw the line against malaria.
Thank you very much. We are doing several things to carry people along to ensure that we disseminate. And one of these is what you are helping us to do right now which is also to make sure that people understand that malaria is a big threat in the country. May I emphasize before I go back to the issue that you've raised, that we're talking about 61 million cases in Nigeria. We're talking about Nigeria being, one out of 4 persons that have malaria lives in Nigeria. We're talking about 1 out of 5 deaths due to malaria or malaria-related issues is in Nigeria. You know, when we are talking about malaria and death, there are about 409,000 deaths globally, out of which 23% of that is in Nigeria. It's a serious issue. 61% of that number of deaths has to do with children less than 5 years, which means that about 28 children less than 5 years die as a result of malaria. Now, that's serious. I'm talking about globally. In Nigeria, we're talking about 11 persons dying every hour due to malaria or malaria-related issues. That is how serious malaria is and should be taken that. So, and we are trying to make sure that we convey this message through several channels. In the past 1 week, we've had interactions with professional bodies, we've had interactions with CSOs, we've had interactions with the media, we've had interactions with several groups of people, all to be used as channels to reach out to the populace so that they understand that malaria is a serious threat to living.
All right. Well,
we have just, okay. Go ahead.
I just wanted to, because we are completely out of time, I just wanted to, yes, wish you the best, because most certainly you have a lot of work on your hands. I mean, those figures that you just mentioned, they are definitely not figures to gloss over. They are not, and they are not just figures, they are human beings. They are people who held promises, for a better world. We have to thank you very much for your time and thoughts this morning. Mr. Chukwu Okoronkwo is the Director and Head, Advocacy, Communication and Social Mobilization of the National Malaria Elimination Program in the Federal Ministry of Health, as well as Mr. Okefu Oyale Okoko, the Deputy Director, Integrated Vector Management of the National Malaria Elimination Program at the Federal Ministry of Health. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts this morning.
Thank you for having us.
All right.
Thank you for having us.
Yes. Up next is a focus on Earth Day, right after now. Thanks for staying with us. During the week, we celebrated Planet Earth with the theme, Restore Our Earth. The World Earth Day this year focused on natural processes, emerging green technologies, and innovative thinking that can restore the world's ecosystems. This morning, to talk a little more on that, we have Chukwumerije Okereke, who is Professor of Environment and Development from the University of Reading, as well as Desmond Majakodumi, who is an environmental activist. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time and thoughts. Let me begin with you, Prof. This is like the 50-something edition of Earth Day. What's different this year?
Thank you very much, and thanks for having me. Well, the difference this year, if any, is that it highlights the urgency, the need for much greater attention by all stakeholders to limit the damage that we all as a collective are doing to the planet system. Never before has the Earth been faced with such a grave danger. We are depleting our natural resources at an alarming rate. And some people have described Nigeria and Africa as the ground zero of global environmental challenges. And so the significance of the Earth Day this year is that there is a need for a much greater and concerted attention by all stakeholders to shine light on the damage, on the deterioration, on the exacerbation of the global health challenges that we're having, so that we can leave a planet that is inhabitable by future generations. And the worst area now is climate change, but actually there is no area where there is where the figures are not alarming. Whether you're talking about biological diversity, deforestation, the blue economy, consumption, you name it. The statistics tell a very alarming or paint an alarming picture in all spheres of the Earth system. So we need a new governance regime. We need a new international cooperation. We need the people like Des Magic, the civil society, to shout more and be more aggressive in drawing attention to this problem. Thank you.
Well, incidentally, Des Magic himself is here in this conversation with us. So let me just throw it, right at him. Well, Mr. Majokulumi, you have been at this for long enough, and consequently, the issues are right there at your fingertips. Perhaps we should begin from there. Of course, Professor Okereke has mentioned a few, but for you, what are those critical issues as far as the Earth is concerned that we may or may not be giving significant or any attention at all?
It's a good question, but Prof has really hit it on the head. The most critical issue is that the reality of the situation is that planet Earth supplies our life support, everything that we rely on to survive. The oxygen, the water, the food, the medication, everything. It comes from a stable Earth, which has been in harmony with itself for centuries upon centuries upon centuries, which is the only way that the human civilization was able to emerge, because of the relative stability and harmony that the Earth was operating on. And we have just been blasting away and blasting away and blasting away. And I think what needs to be very thoroughly and closely examined and dealt with is the reason why we have been blasting away. The reality is, and it's a painful reality, is that we human beings, or at least a very, very large group of us, have not been living in the requisite way that is required, the way that is required for the flagship species. We are the most intelligent species on the planet. We have wonderful capabilities. But unfortunately, we have not allowed ourselves to evolve enough to be responsible enough to use the fruits of our development, the fruits of witty invention, the fruits of our technology. We're still operating extremely primitively towards each other, fighting here, fighting there, using the technology so much to commit all kinds of atrocities against us. But worse still, we're committing these atrocities against nature. And in so doing, we are actually coming into conflict or contradiction or enacting some basic laws of action and reaction. Newton's third law of motion, every action begets a reaction. And nature is now reacting. Nature is now reacting, and she will react very, very violently. This is why Secretary General of the United Nations said very recently that mankind is committing war against nature, and this is suicidal, because nature always fights back, and she's fighting back with far more vehemence now. So what we're missing actually is the mindset. This is a wake-up call to all of us, that we need to have a renewal of our minds. We need to start behaving far more compassionately, far more caringly, not just towards each other, but towards this wonderful miracle of creation, which is our life support system. And then we can analyze those little and major specific things. Deforestation is one of the major issues that has to be tackled. And of course, this awful plastic pollution. And that's apart from the obvious, hundreds and hundreds of millions and millions of tons of different types of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. That has to be stopped immediately. So this is it, renewal of the mind.
It's interesting, that you mentioned the fact that, the government angle, that governments don't seem to be giving enough attention. Because, on the one hand, this is a global program. This is a global celebration, so to speak. Earth Day is been done globally since 1970, and if memory serves right, we understand that it was one of the reasons that President Nixon of the U.S., created the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency at the time, which came up with a number of other legislations in that country. But the question that bothers my mind right now, Mr. Maja Kudume, is if government started this, and even right there within the Sustainable Development Goals are a few items that talk about what we need to do concerning the environment, climate change, clean water, and all those things. How come governments all over the world, even here in Nigeria, aren't giving the kind of attention to Earth Day or to the Earth, as opposed to how it's done?
Exactly. Yes, exactly. Again, it's a manifestation of this issue that we're highlighting. There has to be a change in our attitudes. And, in all fairness, there are some people who are making those changes. People like Prof. There, he's come into this realization many, many years ago. And just recently, there was this wonderful climate summit just a couple of days ago, which was driven by the United States president himself, and several other government leaders came, and they have started to make the right sort of pledges. And also there are people in the United Nations, the Secretary General and other people in the World Health Organization, World Meteorological Organization, who, they've seen the data, they've seen the science, and the reality is, to put it in an extremely simplistic way, 2 + 2 = 4. It does. Yeah, it does. And the law of gravity is a real law, and that's one of the expressions of the law of action and reaction. And they're seeing the science, they've seen the data, and they're getting scared. So, the hope is that people of the world, and we're seeing a lot of the young people now, are deciding to say, hey, no, this is our future at stake. You elders have caused all this problem because of your very, very wrong attitudes, not just towards each other, but expressing them also towards nature, our very life support systems, which you're in the process of wrecking. Look, we only have between 8 to 12 years, probably about 10 years, to address this. And once we go beyond that, we now start to get into a scenario where the degradation becomes irreversible. As great as our technology might be, or as great as we think our technology might be, there's been situations many times. We've seen hurricanes, massive hurricanes coming to New York. They know exactly when it's going to come, where it's going to come, and with all the moon landing, Mars landing technology, they cannot divert that hurricane for 1 inch or delay it for 1 second. So don't rely on the technology. Just rely on our attitude, which must change. And the people of the world have to come together. And this is the silver lining of the cloud. Because for once, all of humanity is faced with this major problem. It's an existential problem. And the only way the problem is going to be solved is by humanity coming together. And the technology to bring us together is already here. Prof is over there in Europe, I'm here in Lekki, you're over there where you are. We're all coming together. We need to come together to solve this. And guess what? Forget about your religion. Forget about your ethnicity, your tribe. Forget about your gender. We are all one people on one planet, and we must come together and inform our governments that they must follow the instructions of their leaders. We're in a democracy where leaders of the government, they are serving us now, is it not? So we got to put far more pressure on them, far more.
All right. Well, Dr. Okereke, let me bring this back to you. I'm looking at almanac.com, for instance, their own page on this Earth Day. They listed 10 things, 10 activities that people can do where they are. Government has its job cut out for it, no doubt. But it's interesting, one of the things that's recommended, Professor Okereke, by these people about taking care of Earth is to think about our diet. And I find that quite interesting. I find it interesting because, I mean, it's so simple. Is that to say that what we need to do individually to pay attention to Earth is that simple, or is as complex as what governments must do all over the world?
Well, thanks very much. First of all, let me just step back a little bit and add to the excellent answer that Majek gave you with respect to why it appears that we have been celebrating Earth Day for a very, very long time, and yet it appears also that very little has been achieved. The central challenge lies in the tension between economic development and Earth management. The fact is that actually, in order to live a decent life, you need a certain level of economic development. However, it gets to a point where if you are not careful in the way you exploit natural resources in order to support development, you end up undermining the very basis upon which development depends. So let me give you a critical example. So you see, for example, we have depended for many, many years on fossil fuel in order to have light in our home, in order to be able to drive our car. But climate change is also caused by the pumping of pollutions coming from that heating of our home or driving of our car or powering our economic system. And precisely because we, in what we call externalities, we haven't made the people that are profiting the most from these economic activities to pay. So for example, you're producing your soap, you pour the water into the ocean or the river next to you. You sell your soap at 20 naira because you are able to pour the soapy water filled with detergent into the neighboring river, which is then collected by your neighbor 10 kilometers down the line. Whereas if actually companies are made to internalize that externality, the cost of soap may be more, but then the environment will be preserved. And as Majek said, we need to understand that it is in the interest, our own interest, to behave in a more environmental sustainable way. And the example you gave in diet is a very good example. In Europe, where I am currently residing, one of the biggest challenges is obesity. Obesity comes from eating more than you actually need to survive. It turns out that in doing so, especially when you are eating plenty of meat, you are also adding to climate change because a lot of what we call greenhouse gas emission comes from rearing of cows. And so the almanac is right that in looking at how we eat, changing our diet, for example, eating less meat, we will be able to contribute significantly to lowering greenhouse gas emissions. And this is vital because, as Majek already said, if we can find a balance, the example of diet that you gave is a perfect one. If we can, drive less, live less ostentatious life, eat only what we need, trek a little bit more, exercise, we will be preserving nature while also living healthier. So it is not always the case that by looking after the environment, you have to go and live like a dinosaur or go and live in the Stone Age. In fact, more and more evidence are emerging that life lived in the balance between nature and economic development can be the best. Look at China, for example. We celebrate China because China has grown its economy sometimes up to 2 digits in the last 20 years. But the consequence is that if you go to Beijing, sometimes you're not able to see more than 50 meters because of air pollution. And now China is spending nearly 7% of its GDP trying to address air pollution. And more people die as a result of air pollution in China than any other disease. So this, again, is a clear example of how often you can go too much on the other side, trying to pursue economic development at the expense of caring for the planet Earth. So yes, individual change of diet is necessary, but there are also many things which the government needs to do in order to lay down the structure to enable people to live in a more sustainable way.
Challenge that you have raised now, Prof, is that there's quite a lot to do, and I mean, I couldn't agree with you more, but let's begin with what the people need to do. Come to government. You've talked about, government, beg your pardon, private organizations that use, that one way or the other pollute the environment. But let's talk about what people themselves can do to reduce risks to the environment. If you can give us a few, so that those who are watching us right now all over the world can do their own bit.
Oh, thank you. There are many things. We've already talked about eating responsibly, changing your diet to eat less meat. But the general reduction in consumption is a big issue. There are many people, especially in developed world, that, own far too much stuff. They have more cars than they need. They have more clothing than they need. They have more food than they need. Do you know that nearly 50% of the food that is bought from the supermarket here in the UK are eventually wasted? Not to talk of the wastage that happens in the supermarkets themselves. There are many people that have 3 wardrobes and they don't wear all these clothes. Why do you need 3 big cars when you can only ride in one? Why do you need to keep your house heated more than necessary? So people need to generally lower their consumption. Then you have to travel in an environmentally sustainable way. Better to use bicycle. I just went to the city center and came back this morning. I rode on the bicycle, okay? I could have driven my car, but I didn't need to. And also, by riding the bicycle, I'm trying to keep healthy. This is another great example on how you can live a more sustainable life, but also live a healthier life. And so you ride bicycle, you walk where you can. I see people who are driving all over the place when they can actually walk. Majek has talked about the right disposal of waste. Don't throw your sachet paper all around. Put it in the right place. There is also what we call segregation of waste, and on I can go. Plant trees. Don't deforest. Don't cook with, dirty cooking stove materials. There are just so many things that individually we can do. The whole concept of individual environmental responsibility is a big issue, and I'm happy that you are highlighting it. We may talk about the companies and government, but yes, you're right. There are several things we can do at our individual level.
All right, well, Mr. Majokodumi, let me bring this to you. Prof mentioned something earlier about technology and development and how that has had its own effect on the way we do things. So if you were to speak to that balance, how would it go? On the one hand, we need development. Technology plays a huge role in that. At the same time, we need to consider the environment. How do we get a balance? Because that's clearly a responsibility for both governments and the private sector.
Absolutely, and the desire to develop is a little bit flawed, to be honest. It's a little bit, because what sometimes looks like development in terms of, okay, you're going to set up a nice urban center in the middle of the wetland, which is sandfield and sandfield. In the long term, if in that process of your development, or as Prof alluded to, you're using energy systems that are deadly and polluting, like we did in Beijing and so on. So in the long term, if you're wrecking the very life support system that you rely on, it's not development. It might just have the illusion. So, we come to a critical stage now. This is a critical turning point for humanity. Either we get it right and we start to move on to a far better world, a far more harmonious world, which is run by far better principles. I know this sounds very idealistic. And, 20, 30, 40 years ago, it would have been idealistic. But now, we're talking about simply survival. Because if we don't change our attitude, particularly to the environment, to nature, the type of catastrophic consequences will be more than horrendous. Honestly, you can't even see it in your worst nightmares. A little glimpse of it is what some of those terrible, terrible internally displaced people's camps look like. We have hundreds of millions of people living by the coast. Nigeria is particularly vulnerable. The oceans are rising. The voracity of the weather patterns that are hitting our coast now are far worse. We're going to be opening up ourselves for far worse floods. Places like Lagos could be actually almost half submerged in the next 30, 40 years if this continues, not to mention other coastal cities. Where would those people be rushing to? Go and meet people that are running from the desert encroachment and go and meet them in a place that is subject to terrible valley erosion and so on? No, our attitude was changed. So yes, okay, you have your technology which you want to use for development. Primarily, you have to look at the environmental impact. Is this going to be good for the environment? If it's not, you adjust it until it is. And if you can't adjust it until it is, you reject it, no matter how profitable it is. And again, part of the problem, as Prof so rightly alluded to, is this worshipping of the prophet magic.
Mr. Majakunu, just 1 second. Just 1 second, because we are already gradually winding now. But I just want to ask this. Does that mean, because there is such a thing as environmental, impact assessment, does that mean that we compromise, on this, between government and the private sector?
Oh, yes, we've never followed. We've just allowed ourselves to be corrupted again by this greed. And the reality is that, here we are in Nigeria, we're a God-fearing country, and we better start listening to what God says in his scriptures. And what does he say? What's the most fundamental thing in the scriptures? Love him, love the Creator. If you love the Creator, you have to love his creation. How can your father give you the most wonderful house, which gives you all the services? You say, Daddy, I love you. You set fire to the house. Nonsense, especially if your children are in the house. You pay a very, very high price for that. Retribution is a very, very serious law. So we need to adjust. The time has come. And I'm very optimistic because programs like this, here we are on this great channel. Lots of people will be listening. You have people like Prof coming in, people like yourself, enlightened minds are their consciousness is being raised about the urgency of the situation and what's causing the problem. The problem is coming from the aberrant behavior of our character. Our characters need to change. We need to be far more caring, loving, love our God, love his creation, and love our neighbors. And hey, we'll make the world a better place.
I guess you have just given some people a reason for going to church tomorrow. When you go to church, thank you very much.
And you, no more Pomo and Suya for you, right?
Well, as somebody said, when they saw when Don said that you should shun Pomo in order to avoid cancer, a cartoonist said, Don, go back to your lab. But for now, we have to leave this at this point. Chukwumeri Okereke, Professor of Environment and Development at University of Reading, thank you so much for your time and thoughts, as well as Desmond Majakodumi, who is an environmental activist. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time this morning. Okay, so we are taking the home stretch. When we return, do stay with us. And that is our artist of the week, Yinka Lawansin, also known as Lamborghini, an Afro dancehall singer, global prison ambassador, and AFI representative at the United Nations in Vienna as well as New York. And he's using his music and motivational message to bring healing to men, women, and juveniles in prison across the world. He has several songs to his credit and recently released a new single titled Move. So where have you moved to? Good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining us. All right.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Wow, this is quite interesting. I mean, I like to dance, so the dance hall part is it's just that, you know, I can't stand in my studio now, otherwise my director is going to come for me. But first of all, tell us, you know, your story, your foray into music, and until now, how did it start for you?
So basically, like, you know, growing up in Lagos in a Cotton Bay, I was part of the children's choir. You know, that's exactly where it all started from. And when I became a little bit older, you know, I made up my mind that I wanted to use music. You know, I chose music as my career, you know, and, you know, started going to the studio, recording, you know, dropping singles here and there. But a lot changed for me at 23 years old, you know, where I realized that music is not just to entertain, you know, but I could use it as a tool, you know, to bring hope and, you know, uplift, you know, both my fans and those that are locked up, you know, behind bars, you know, and that's how, you know, I became more intentional, more deliberate, you know, with my lyrics, the kind of songs I put out, you know, because I see myself as, for every time I'm in the studio and I open my mouth, I see myself as it's an opportunity, you know, for me, you know, to pass the right message out there.
Why prisons?
Good question. I used to tell people that prison chose me, you know, because, that's what I tell people. Prison chose me because I never would have thought in 100 years, you know, that I would, you know, I'll be the one going into the facilities, you know, to perform, bring hope, you know, to this inmate. But while I was in Nigeria, I got tired of people complaining, you know. It's like I was surrounded by a group of youths. I know a lot of things are not working in the country, but I just felt like I want to be on the solution side of things, you know. I want to be part of the people, you know, bringing solution. And the prison, you know, came to my mind. So I reached out to the authorities, you know, reached out to the former controller general of prison at the time, you know, Olushola Ogundipe, and that's how the journey started for me, you know. And it brings me so much joy, you know, just to see, you know, these thousands of inmates, you know, see them smile, see them feel uplifted whenever I'm in the facility, you know, performing for them.
That's interesting. Prison chose you. You know, the mere thought of prison to some people is scary enough. I mean, the word is scary. Well, by the way, they are not prisons no longer. They are now called correctional facilities, correctional centers. And interestingly, this journey, this path that you have taken, has taken you all over the world. Tell us the examples of you know, your visits to correctional facilities, you know, in various parts of the world. What are the things that you have seen, and how do you think we can cut down the numbers of people who are compelled to go to these correctional facilities?
So it's interesting you asked that question, because the first facility I got into outside of Nigeria was in Leicester in the UK, HMP prison Leicester, and that was the first time in my part, you know, doing prison reform that I'll find myself, you know, in the UK. And the first thing that occurred to me is the high level of, equipment, high level of vocational facility, and the way they made the facility extremely conducive. At the point I asked myself, I said, am I in a prison or I'm in somebody's apartment? And when I saw that, it dawned on me that, the part when they say correctional, it dawned on me that is one aspect that Nigeria still needs to work extremely hard on. Yes, prison is important, but it is not effective if the necessary tools to reform the minds are not in place, and also addressing the question that you asked for, because there were 2 inmates in each cell when the particular facility I visited, and they were telling me it's congested. I said, only 2 in a cell and you're calling that congested? Where I'm coming from, like my song you're playing right now, I say, human being sardine, na sardine, human being sardine, So the problem and why our prison is congested is because of our slow judiciary system, until we realize that nobody ends up in prison without going through the judiciary system. And if we can, do everything we can to ensure that there is proper database, there is cases are being picked up when they should be picked up, cases are being addressed when they should be addressed, we will continue to experience congestion in our facilities in Nigeria. And it breaks my heart. I wouldn't lie to you, And when I started performing, because I kicked off my global prison tour in 2020, January, February 2020, and we started from DC, between DC and Maryland, but as a result of COVID, we had to hold on. On the tour. But in February, I visited 5 facilities. I would not lie to you. One of the facility looked like a university, and it was a juvenile facility. They are juveniles. They have everything you can think of, equipment-wise and vocational, the right number of staff, the right food, even up to the food, nutrition, everything was in place. They look clean, from their outfits, everything, and, you can't underestimate the power of all these elements when you're trying to reform someone's mind, Okay. Make sure they are eating the right set of food, make sure the equipment, make sure the environment is clean, make sure, because when you are trying to reform, right? Reform is not necessarily the book they are reading, but every element around them counts because they are locked up in that space, and I, like every facility I go to, I tell them, I tell the men and women and the boys and girls in these facilities, I said, you are not in a prison. You are in a waiting room. What you do while you are in this waiting room will determine how you will be reintegrated properly back into the society.
Well,
so it's
if I let you go, I'm pretty sure that we can do this for another 1 hour, because it will seem like your passion. Now I'm confused. Should I be asking you about prisons or about music? But because your passion is quite contagious right there. Well, as you have made us known, your career in music has spanned quite a number of years and has touched, along a good number of paths as well. But I want to believe that you are raising, should I use the word disciples? Or this prison thing that you're talking about, but maybe we can talk about that some other time. But tell us about this your new song and what's the plan?
So I wrote that song during the pandemic, During the pandemic, nobody could move. Nobody could do anything. A lot of people didn't even know what to do with themselves, as a result of the pandemic. Nobody has ever seen the world shut down like that, and I just wanted something to encourage people to be able to move even while they are at home. I wanted to be able to connect with the global community, in this time that we're all experiencing this global pandemic, and I just started writing it. It made me appreciate my family more because I was always on the move. I was always traveling, and I really was not paying attention to certain things that were very important, in my personal life. So I just it was a reflection moment, and in between that reflection, I thought I should share the song, with the world, and just keep moving. No matter how slow or how fast you think it is, there is something for you to do that will keep you going and put you through, this particular stage that the world is right now. So that's where the inspiration for the song came from.
When you write "Move," when we were told to stay, I wonder if you wrote another song titled "Stay," but don't answer that question.
No, you move in your mind.
In your mind, okay.
Like in your mind, move using the social platform.
Oh.
Move. A lot of people felt that their businesses cannot be done online. A lot of companies realized that they don't even need 100 staff coming to their office every day. You can work, from your various locations. You're moving.
That sounds a little more like a philosophical thing. But, one last thing just before we wrap it all up. So, movie's out. And another 5 years from now, what do we expect from Lamborghini?
Well, 5 years from now, we're looking at, taking the music on a global scale, which we're already doing right now. Move is currently my highest stream song on the global front. We have a lot of huge following in America right now, across Europe, even like South America and some other part of Africa as well. So 5 years from now, we're looking at, going on the world stages, performing, and hopefully putting out a couple of albums as well along the way.
I'm just wondering, lastly, I said lastly the other time, but just maybe about 10, 15 seconds. I'm wondering, Lamborghini, the brand, and prisons. First of all, why Lamborghini? Why not Ferrari or Peugeot or Lada?
So Lamborghini was a nickname from my dad. My dad was a marine engineer, and he traveled a lot. So whenever he's around, I was one of the children that was all over him so much. It's like there is no breathing space. So he would look for things around the house and say, okay, go and do this, go and do that, go and do this. And the one day I came back with such a quick speed. As he said, have you finished everything? I said, yes. You are now moving like a Lamborghini. And it became a nickname around the house. But when I lost my dad, the name meant more to me, than just a nickname, and I just told myself, I went to the court, I swore an affidavit, I made it part of my official names, and it became my stage name as well, because it reminds me of that special, moment that I shared with my father.
Well, you just told so many people right now to live unending memories in the lives of the people they encounter, especially their children and their wards. Well, we have to thank you very much and wish you all the best in all that
Thank you for having me.
To make the world a better place. Yinka Lawansin, also known as, no, maybe I should say it better now that I know it's your official name. Yinka Lamborghini Lawansin, right?
Yes, exactly. That's how it is, actually.
All right, then. Thank you so much and enjoy.
Thank you for having me.
All right, then. So that's the show today. Many, many thanks for watching and have a wonderful rest of your weekend. And please, make Nigeria better for you. I'm Ayo Makinde. Enjoy your weekend.